Jim Brown. I had the pleasure. I'll show you this, guys. Mm, mm, mm. Mm, mm, mm. Let me do this. I want to do this for you before we continue here. I had great conversations with this man numerous times, and I did a lot of stuff with Jim with the America I Can program he had. I would say to you that Jim Brown, in pro football history, his place, Lawrence Taylor, Reggie White, Jerry Rice, Brady, it's those guys. It's Jim Brown, Reggie, Lawrence Taylor, Jerry Rice, Tom Brady. Then it's the rest of them. It's the rest. Do you know why it's the rest of them? Because when you tune and turn their game film on, they look like they don't belong. You watch game film on Jim Brown and you're watching him playing against the NFL during his era, and you're like, he doesn't belong. He just doesn't belong. When you watch Lawrence Taylor, they just don't belong. They look like they're in a different speed. When you watch Reggie throwing guys around, or you watch Lawrence Taylor pass rushing, or you watch Jerry Rice catch a football, they were just different. Different. Very complex man. Retired at the age of 28. In his 9 years playing in the National Football League, led the National Football League in rushing. Look at this. 8 times. 3-time most valuable player. 5 yards a carry on a football team that really had nothing else. It was just Jim Brown. Carried the entire Brown organization on his back. Syracuse, he got jobbed out of winning the Heisman Trophy because he was black. They gave it to some stiff, I think from Oregon. Maybe Oregon State it was. He should have won the Heisman, but he was black and he was considered a militant. You know why he was a militant? Because he believed in rights. You know, he walked on at Syracuse at first because they didn't know if they wanted to have black players on the Syracuse campus at the time. Truly one of their greatest activists. Supported Muhammad Ali. I mean, you got to remember something about guys like him and Russell and Kareem and Muhammad Ali. Those guys actually did stand up for civil rights. Those were actual people. They weren't these paper-made Colin Kaepernicks. These people were this. Jim Brown was this dude. He embodied it on the field and he embodied it in his life. A lot of controversy in that man. But when you talk about him playing in the National Football League and where his place is in history, it's cemented as one of those dudes. Like if you were to put a Mount Rushmore, who would be your Mount Rushmore if you were to put a Mount Rushmore of NFL players? Jim Brown's on it. I think you got to put Tom Brady on it. Jim Brown, Tom Brady, Jerry Rice. And I think you could debate either Lawrence Taylor or Reggie. But I think you'd have to put Reggie, or I think you'd have to put Lawrence Taylor up there. So if I'm going to do my Mount Rushmore, of pro football greatness. Jim Brown. I'd have Brown, Rice, LT, and Brady. Those are your four. Got to put Brady's got to be there. Brady, Brown, Rice, and Lawrence Taylor. With Reggie knocking on the door. Those are your 5 greatest football players, and those are your 4 Mount Rushmore guys. Nobody embodied the game like Jim Brown. My uncle, this guy right here. And those legendary New York Giant games played against Jim Brown. Played against them guys forever. And I said to him, I go, what was it like playing against Jim Brown? He goes, it was like a whistle on a train when he ran through the line of scrimmage. Sam Huff would say when he ran into you, he would just fold you like a chair if you weren't in proper position. Andy said that those games at Yankee Stadium and Brown was playing in them games was like a freight train. You just heard whistles. And by the way, you see this? This is Robustelli's New York Giant Ring of Honor jersey. Handed to me. It's an heirloom. He's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And he's in the New York Giant Hall of Fame. Said that playing against, I can't believe we got 2 Hall of Fame voters who know Jim Brown are on today. Brown was one of the early Black Pride activists. Harry Belafonte, Ali, all those guys. And hey, what a legend. Whew. Dude, getting on the phone and I had Jim Brown on my show. My wife used to produce, and Jim would come on the program. Actually came into my studio. And the reason he came on was because of Robustelli and my relationship with Robustelli. And he would come in and sit down and talk to me and just say, hey, no one could stop me. How great do you think Ernie Davis would have been if he wasn't taken away so early? My God, Ernie Davis and Jim Brown in the same backfield with the Cleveland Browns would have been unbelievable. Would have unbelievably brought another championship to the Cleveland Browns. Ernie Davis was a special football player. Special football player. Jim Brown, for sure, man. Wow. How about those iconic games with the Cleveland Browns and the Philadelphia Eagles back in the day at Franklin Field? Dude, that shit gives me goosebumps. I'm sorry, I'm a big historian on that stuff. Shit, man. Yeah, I mean, those games must have been insane. All those great Hall of Fame players playing against one another. No rules. Just playing ball against each other. Concrete playing against Jim Brown. Robustelli, Huff. Cat Cavage. I'm mentioning names you guys probably don't know. 9 seasons. Imagine if that guy played longer. Shit, he led the NFL in rushing 8 of those 9 years. 3 MVP awards. Won a world championship for the Browns. Charlie goes, I saw games at Franklin Field. Gale Sayers was the most exclusive back in history, probably. There's only 2 backs, Ray, that I would put in the same conversation as one another that were so electric like that. OJ and Gale. And maybe Barry. Maybe Barry, too. Did OJ go to Syracuse? No, Juice went to Southern Cal. Dan, you realize Syracuse had Brown Davis, Floyd Little, and Larry Zonka consecutively. Absolutely. Floyd Little's a Connecticut guy from New Haven, and we talked about this. Also, Moose Johnson played there too, if I'm not mistaken. And so did Jamie Morse. He played there too, one of the giant backs from back in the day. They had great backs that were back in that time. Absolutely. And even some of the Hall of Fame running backs, they did a great job of recruiting the Northeast. It was Penn State. It was Penn State and Syracuse and to some extent Boston College during my time when they were recruiting. But they weren't really gigantic. The only true power in the Northeast was Penn State and Syracuse. And then Penn State and Joe Pa started taking over because they just started out recruiting Syracuse. Notre Dame, too, is in that section of the country. They got a lot of guys in that section, too. So, look, man, Chuck Bednarik versus Jim Brown. Poof, Jesus criminy. Hey, you better wear two mouthpieces. You better wear two mouthpieces. Eric Dickerson's the best running back, GG, I've ever played against. And he's a friend. He's a friend. Barry used to say, give me an inch. Actually, Greg, that was stolen from Gale Sayers. Because Sayers' line back in the 60s was, all I need is an inch of daylight. Give me 1 inch of daylight. That was Sayers' line. 1 inch of daylight. There's a John Facenda NFL films on that 1 day of daylight. He goes, all I need is 1 inch of daylight. You think Adrian Peterson's up with? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Jim Brown would be a success today. With these shitty defenses that they have in the NFL, Jim Brown would, do you understand he ran a 9-100? This guy was an All-American lacrosse player. Do you know he's in the Lacrosse Hall of Fame? And he's also in the College Football and Pro Football Hall of Fames. Jim Brown was a Hall of Fame lacrosse player. He ran a 9-100. This guy was incredible. 9-100 at 240 pounds at 6'3". You don't think that would play out today? And especially playing against some of these shitty defenses? Jim Brown had 2,000 yards rushing today. You couldn't stop that guy. See, the defenses back in the day, you know why those defenses were better? Not better athletes, but you know why they were better technically? They were able to keep the players on their field longer. You didn't have a salary cap. Players, if you were drafted one place, you stayed in one place. Over 12,000 yards in 9 seasons. Yeah, what do you think? and let's not forget something. They played 12 games. They played 12 games for like half of his career. Hey, Tone, remember that. He played 12 games, then it went to 14. 9 seasons, 1,200 plus yards, 25 receiving, 106 TDs in 9 years. Absolutely. They played 12 games for a boatload of his years. Then they went 14. Jim Brown never played in a 16-game schedule. They never. I think the most yards he ever had was like 1,900 or 18 something. Like 1885 or maybe it was 1,900 yards. He had something like that, and he did that in 14 games. I think he did that. Okay? I think he did that. Yeah. All the Hall of Fame guys want me to get stuff together for him because they're going to start doing stuff. 160 yards a game. No. He's the only man, Neil, in pro football history to average 100 yards a game. That's the stat. Nobody in their careers have averaged 100 yards a game. He's the only man that has averaged 100 yards a game for every game he played. I can't wait to talk to our Hall of Famers today. Fly, Eagle, Fly. Jim Brown was a super dude, super duper athlete with a beast mentality. I remember those 12-game seasons. Bo Jackson, another one of those elite guys. Absolutely. Let's dedicate the show today. Sills, absolutely. Today's athletes are bigger and stronger, faster in all sports. Absolutely. But not, I would say this to you, Yale. Everything you just said is true. But do you know why they're not more technically sound? Offensive linemen that come into the NFL today, you need Jeff Stoutland because you don't have 4 years of coaching. You don't practice like you used to practice in the day. Shit, you don't even practice in the NFL like that anymore. It takes you longer to develop a great skill set to play offensive line or any position in the NFL because the NFLPA and the NFL they don't have the same practice standards. You don't have preseason games. You don't have 3 months of training camp. You don't have any of that stuff to teach technique. The technique that these guys get today, you have to go over and above to have yourself prepared to play in today's NFL. Because most of the kids that come out of college today are exactly what Yale said. No, Yale, I'm not debating that. I'm not saying that today it's not safe for today. It is. But you're not technically more sound just because the fact you don't practice it. How could you be more technically sound today when you have 2 hours of practice a week and you don't practice in full gear and you don't hit and you don't scrimmage and you don't do any of that? How could you be more skilled? You're not more skilled. You're a better athlete. You're bigger. You're faster and you're stronger. That's all true. But don't under any pretense believe Reggie White couldn't play in today's NFL. What do you think Reggie White would do to that kid you just drafted from the Eagles? What do you think he would do to that kid? That kid would look like one of those little balls in a slingshot. Reggie would kill that kid. There'd be a no moss. Do you actually think those guys in New York could actually block Lawrence Taylor with the limited skill that they have at preparing to play offensive tackle? Lawrence Taylor would kill quarterbacks. He would be completely illegal in today's NFL because he couldn't hit the quarterbacks the way he did back then. He just couldn't do it. And he would be doing it often. He'd be like that Burfict kid. They would be suspending him every week for the hits on the quarterback. You think they're going to allow him to come around the corner and hit people like that? Jim Brown would run everyone over. 9'1", 100, 6'3", 240 yards. And you think that the defenses could stop him? Again, you're right, Yale. They're bigger, they're better, they're faster, but they're not more skilled. They're not more skilled. But they would make up for it because of their athleticism. Like when you watch Micah Parsons today, and you see guys like Chase Young, Hassan Reddick, Nolan Smith, you see guys like that, you look at it and go, man, that guy could play in a 3 technique. He could play in a 5 or a 7. You could put him in a 34, 43. You couldn't do that shit back in the day. You couldn't. You guys weren't big enough. And the offensive linemen were gargantuan back then. Now they got great skill. I mean, Lane Johnson today, 6'5", 6'6", 330 pounds, 320. Look here, Jordan Mailata is even better example of what Yale's saying. Yeah, here's a guy 6'9", 350 pounds, and he looks like he's 260. And he could probably run an under 5 flat 40. He's got immense feet. A guy like that would play defensive tackle back in the 70s and 80s. That's how good he was. Earl Campbell's probably the closest to Jim Brown. The only difference was, and Earl Campbell had great speed on him. The only difference was that Brown had Olympic speed. Hope there's a football heaven. Jeremiah, well, I'll tell you what. If there's a football heaven and you don't have Jim Brown in it, then you shouldn't have a football heaven. Because that guy is one of the angels that belongs in the football heaven. I'm not saying he was a perfect human, because there's a lot of shit in his life story. But when you talk football-wise, if that guy's not in your football heaven, there ain't a football heaven. Okay? Or is it? Whew. How funny we started off with Deshaun Jackson wanted to retire a an Eagle, and we get the news that Jim Brown has passed. Best backs in NFL history. Brown, if I had to have one game where I needed a running back to carry me to a championship, it'd be Jim Brown, Emmitt Smith, OJ. If I had to give you the 5 greatest NFL running backs, man, I can't wait to get our Hall of Famers on. 5 greatest NFL running backs. Wow. Brown, Peyton, Emmett, who would be the other 2? OJ. I saw OJ on Monday Night Football go for 270 yards versus the Steel Curtain, and there was nobody on that team. And he just ran through them on Monday night. I was a little kid. I never had my jaw open more than watching one man kill a great defense led by Mean Joe Green. Man, Barry wasn't better than Emmett. No, he wasn't. He was more electric. But it's not true. Emmett didn't have minus yard plays. Barry had a ton of them. Okay? Jim Brown was a great actor too, man. Absolutely. Actually, if you think about it, Jim Brown was really, him and the guy who played Shaft were probably your first really great black actors. Dirty Dozen. Jim Brown, I grew up when Jim Brown was, when I grew up as a kid, Jim Brown was like one of the very few black actors I remember. And when he was in a movie with Raquel Welch or something, whatever, I remember watching him. Brown, Peyton, Emmett, OJ. Who would be the 5th best back in pro football history? You had to win a game. I know. Listen, hard to put OJ in there. OJ's a great back. I don't care about the shit off the field. TJ Hooker too, man. Yeah. Hey,